All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be analyzing Week 1, the Thursday and Friday night slate, a handful of notable games to get our college football Week 1 kicked off. We are finally here, finally back. Nick, I know you love Minnesota, the tradition they have here. They always open at home on a Thursday night, and it's going to be no different here. They're going to be on primetime on Fox hosting Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. You know, Jeff Sims transfers in from Georgia Tech, coming off a good season. Has a nice little group of weapons to work with, I'd say. Guys like Marcus Washington, new addition from Virginia, and Billy Kemp. You know, a few guys that can certainly get working vertically, but this Minnesota secondary is no slouch. Tyler Nubbett at safety is great. Justin Whaley, a very good cornerback. So trying to spark up some big plays downfield will be hard unless they can establish a ground game. And with Jeff Sims' legs, they should certainly have an easier time doing that, you know. But the biggest problem is this offensive line is one of the nation's worst, though, coming off an incredibly tough year. In Minnesota, though, they're dead last in tackles for loss, so they don't generate many negative plays, which I think will be a big bonus for this Nebraska running game. But the thing about the Golden Gophers, Nick, is they are exceptional at controlling the line of scrimmage. Only 4 games with 200-plus rushing yards allowed over the last 26 games. Only 123 yards per game on the ground for Nebraska last season. Really failed to utilize what is a pretty deep backfield, I would say. You know, guys like Anthony Grant, Gabe Ervin, Ramir Johnson. This is a pretty respectable backfield, and now you have Jeff Sims. What's your expectations for this Nebraska offense going against a Golden Gopher defense that's looking for another great season under Joe Rossi?
I love this tradition for Minnesota. It's very exciting. I think it's a fun little thing that college football does. They start on a Thursday at home. The crowd is crazy. The weather's always pretty nice in Minneapolis. You know, a good, late summer evening in the capital. You know, it's so fun to have the fans there, full house every single time. They open up against a Big Ten team. It's on Fox, national television. Always a fun little way to get things started for me. I like this matchup a lot. You know, new look Nebraska team under head coach Matt Rule's first season. He has a new offense here to roll out. You know, I think Jeff Sims is a good add at quarterback. He comes over from Georgia Tech, where he had a pretty decent season despite the Yellow Jackets being a pretty poor team overall. I like the way he steps in here, and he's going to be having options to take over this offense and be the new guy to run the whole show. He can run on the ground. He can throw it through the air. I think he's very good, balanced, and adds a lot for this offense. I think Billy Kemp at the slot is a very talented piece that they add. He's a very good wide receiver that can be used in a variety of different places. So nice speed. Marcus Washington's another very good weapon he returns. Slot him at the X. Xavier Betts as well, a redshirt sophomore that could be in line for a pretty decent season at the Z. I think this offense has a new life to it. Gabe Ervin at the running back as well. Anthony Grant could be involved early on, get some touches. This Minnesota defense has to be careful they don't get hit early on from this Nebraska offense that has a nice pace to it, and they could be able to stay in this game very early on.
Who do you think has the matchup on this side of the ball in the trenches? Because, again, the offensive line for the Cornhuskers was flat out awful. Rule obviously wants to up the intensity up front. In Minnesota, even though they do, again, a great job of controlling the line of scrimmage, they don't generate negative plays, which I think eventually could certainly be a backdraw for them. It really hasn't showcased to be one. But when your opponent is basically guaranteed to stay ahead of the sticks the entire game, that can certainly cause some issues, I think, especially late in these contests.
I think right now, certainly Minnesota has the edge. I think the defensive line just has enough to produce to beat this Nebraska offensive line. That has been terrible, absolutely. I think guys like John Joyner on the defensive end getting off the edge there is a good player for Minnesota to have. So right now, I'm going to take Minnesota on the edge there.
Danny Strigo as well. 2 nice edge defenders for this defense. Joe Rossi's done a great job with them. You know, on the flip side, you're going to look at a Minnesota offense that has an exceptional offensive line led by Nathan Bowe. You know, the run game's going to get great volume. Sean Tyler coming over from Western Michigan. Bryce Williams, Zach Evans, those 3 guys are likely going to see, ample touches. But Tyler's going to lead the way, a veteran who's produced before for the Broncos. They're going to want to get him plenty of looks. You know, Nebraska has some good strength on this defensive line, but they're flat out awful versus the run last season. So you certainly, again, you're expecting them to be much better in the trenches from a physicality standpoint. And guys like Nat Hutchmusher and Ty Robinson, they're going to lead the way, Nick, because these guys are strong. I'm very impressed with what they can do when it comes to the bench press. But they have to show that in the trenches. They're switching to a 3-3-5, and that might not be good for linebackers Nick Henrich and Luke Ramir. They're really going to have to be tone setters. I think they might even be worse early on in this game, Nick. It's going to be hard against this offensive line of how bad they were against the run. Obviously, long-term, Tony White, you saw what he did at Syracuse. That defense was great. They're no slouch one bit. I think the Cornhuskers are hoping they'll have the same thing long-term. But for this contest, they might be regressing compared to where they were last year.
I agree. This defense has an interesting transition as they move to the 3-3-5 against this Minnesota offense that's going through a bit of a revamp. They weren't very good through the air at all last year. The quarterback play has been very poor for Minnesota. They bring in Sean Taylor at running back to replace a couple different departing backs. He has a lot of potential there at the back in the backfield. Very good speed on him. Some decent wide receivers. I just worry about the quarterback play. Chris Autumn-Bell at the Z, if he can stay healthy. Very talented wide receiver that can certainly break plays. When I look at this Nebraska defense, I have a ton of question marks. They made some move on the interior early on. Brought in Cameron Lenhart at defensive tackle. MJ Sherman on the outside. At linebacker, Nick Ranier, Nick Henrik, or Luke Ranier, Nick Henrik are two linebackers you need to keep an eye on. Both these guys are very talented players, but they've really struggled as of late. I think they're going to get beat here early on against this Minnesota team that's going to try and exploit the middle defense.
The secondary was one unit I'd praise for Nebraska, led by corner Isaac Gifford. Quentin Newsome, I think, is going to step up this year. Marquise Buford, Omar Brown, some veterans are expected to get a lot of production out of this season. Bad news for them, though, is Miles Farmer opted to transfer here just a couple weeks ago unexpectedly. That's a big leader for them in the back end. He was second on the team in tacklers last year. It's a deep and talented group of pass catchers for Minnesota. This passing attack has really struggled. No real assumption on how they will do with Athan Kamo-Kamilis under center. But tight end Breven Spanford, I think, is going to pick up some crucial first downs. Head and shoulders, the matchup here seems to significantly favor Minnesota, not just through the air, but on the ground as well. Corey Crooms, Chris Autumn-Bell, Daniel Jackson. They also picked up Charlotte transfer Elijah Spencer, again, with Breven Spanford. This is a phenomenal receiving group for Minnesota. Kyle Kamanis, though, is going to have to put them to good use. And I think it's going to start with this running game, and I think they're going to have plenty of success. 34-20 is going to be the final score for me. I think the Golden Gophers are going to run away with this one with the physicality. But we're very interested to see how Nebraska does this season. Obviously, I think they need to match the physicality in the trenches, really need to be strong versus the run, and they just cannot get worn down. If they can do that, they keep everything in front of them in the secondary as well, they'll have a shot in this game. But I think going on the road here in the season opener on a cold Thursday night, it's going to be tough for Nebraska to even cover the spread.
I think Minnesota will win this game. It's going to be, I think Nebraska's going to hang on. I think for 3 quarters, it'll be very competitive. I just think they're going to get a little bit, lose it late on. You have it be a bit of a wider score. I think it's going to be a closer game. I think 8's, a nice win here for Minnesota. I think they're going to have enough just left of the tank to beat them out. I expect a long, nice drive at the end of the game, and it's capped off by a touchdown by Sean Taylor to seal this one off. The over-under of 46, I think, is a very interesting number as well for this game. I like the spread here at Minnesota -7. I think they're going to win this game at home, and they're going to cover the spread. I think a touchdown is pretty favorable for them right now. I just think Nebraska doesn't have enough physicality on both sides of the ball to really be able to win this game. I like what this offense has at Minnesota. As long as the quarterback play can find a pulse this year, this Minnesota offense will be pretty good considering the plethora of weapons they have at wide receiver and tight end.
And now, so at the same time, 8 o'clock Eastern time up in Salt Lake City, the Utah Utes will be trying to get revenge on the Florida Gators after last year's game. A very exciting contest. Anthony Richardson put on a show. Cam Rising had a chance there late, threw a pick in the end zone to seal the deal for the Gators. And that was a big game, a very important one for the Pac-12 in terms of respect. And, I guess they lost the game, Nick, so the respect was not earned, I would say, especially since the same day Oregon got, absolutely flatlined by Georgia. Tough day for the Pac-12. They're looking to get the, week started on a high note here. And, this game being on Thursday, I think is phenomenal. An opportunity to see the Utes host the Gators. Obviously, last year, Utah coming down to Florida, that was a complete shock for them with how the weather is here. And I think you can say the same thing for the Gators. Obviously, it's not going to be as cold as it would maybe be in November or December or anything like that. But I think they're certainly in for a bit of a shock. So conditioning has to be on point, especially with this offensive line. The Gators offense, they're great up front, led by Austin Barber, Micah Mukazi transferring in from Baylor, leading the way for a great running back room. ETN was phenomenal last year, showcasing his good speed. Montreal Johnson, Cam Carroll arrives. This is a great backfield, one of the top 10 nationally for the Gators. The thing here, though, Nick, Graham Mertz still might not be a scheme fit here. Florida, they leaned on the threat of the QB run, a lot last year. AR tore up this defense with his legs. The offensive line still imposed physicality, so it's not getting fully twisted. But that went a long way in this offensive success last year with Richardson throwing up his legs. If UF can't run the ball, though, it's going to be a long game because I'm not the biggest believer in Graham Mertz, even though I definitely think the scheme at Wisconsin held him back. The weapons here, they're going to have to lean on some true freshman receivers like Eugene Watson and Andy Jean to get involved, even though Ricky Purcell can really stretch the field. He's really the only guy they can count on. They do have those young guys that have some speed, though. But I think, Utah run defense, they were on fire over the final 5 games of the season. And if the Gators can't establish that good run presence on early downs, this is going to be a stalemate for their offense, I'd say, Nick. What's the biggest concern here? Are you a believer in Graham Mertz to be able to go on the road here and knock off the Utes?
I'm certainly concerned with the quarterback play here at Florida. I'm concerned a lot with this offense. I do like what they have on the offensive line, some nice physical pieces. They also added Michael McCuzza at left guard, who's a very talented transfer to pick up. They added Damian George at right tackle. I think that was a very nice add as well. Graham Mertz just is not a good fit in the scheme, in my opinion. He's not a good fit overall. Yeah, sure, Wisconsin's scheme didn't help him out really at all, but I just don't think Mertz is a very good quarterback. Seems to be a very weak add for this Florida offense. Is looking to have big shoes to replace with Anthony Richardson, who was drafted very early in the NFL draft. Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne are two incredible backs. Cam Carroll as well as a third back. Running the ball is not going to be a problem for this Florida offense. They'll be able to ground and pound you certainly all year, and that's really going to be what this offense is going to have to rely on, because this wide receiving core leaves a lot to be desired. Caleb Douglas at the X, I'm concerned about. Andy Jean, a true freshman, might be involved early on. Ricky Purcell is really the only notable name here in terms of real talent. Marcus Burke showed us a little bit in certain parts at the wide receiver Z role, but Purcell's going to be the guy they rely on here. I don't trust Mertz at all. I don't trust this offense at all. I think they're going to struggle in this game. They're going to struggle all season.
This is a really good defensive line for Utah. Jonah Ellis, Junior Tafuna, Connor O'Toole stepped up last year. Van Filger trying to get back to his form from 2 years ago. So this is going to be a great matchup in the trenches. I think that it's going to be hard for this team on the road to run it on first and second down. And if they're playing from behind, it's going to be a disaster for them. This Utah secondary, though, last year they did allow a lot of big plays through the air. They do return to Travis Broughton, Cole Bishop as well. So they do have some veterans back there, but they're still giving up plenty of big plays, Nick, but I don't think they're going to be exposed one bit. So obviously the one thing that might work into their favor, it's going to be hard for Florida to count on that. Seems like a bad matchup for this offense, but if they come out and run the ball very well and they can play from ahead, this is going to be a good ball game. The Utes also want to find that physical ground game, though. But there is much more balance here for this offense. I think it's more defined than the Gators by far. Play action is great for this team with Devon Lee and Money Parks. Brant Kuthi doesn't quite have the strong hands like Dalton Kincaid, but his versatility is destined to give Florida fits, especially with an iffy linebacking core, likely to draw some nickel matchups as well. And, Kuthi last year had a phenomenal game against the Gators, and obviously he got hurt early on in the season. A couple weeks later, if Florida can slow down the run game with their nickel defense, then they could be in for a good day overall. I think the balance, though, it's going to be tough to contain. I don't think the pass rush will have many opportunities to work. The edge rushing unit outside of Princely Unamanelli is quite poor anyway, so maybe third and shorts could benefit this defense more than maybe a 3rd and 10 would. You still have a good secondary led by Jason Marshall, and Wilson as well. But I just don't see how this Gator defense is going to show up in this contest, Nick. I think it's going to be hard for them. If they can live in 3rd and short, though, and showcase some physicality in the trenches to get stops, I think that's probably their best shot, other than just trying to go for sacks. Wouldn't you think? Kind of an odd analysis, but I think that's probably one thing that's certainly going to benefit the Gators, because this team last year with Cam Rising, really good on 3rd down.
Certainly, 3rd and shorts could benefit this team a little bit here. I think there is some nice pieces on this Florida defense. Princely coming off the edge there, a very talented player, good returning junior, good experience. Chris McClellan as well as a sophomore defensive tackle. Like to see him break out this year, potentially a nice player, step up opportunity. Shamar James at linebacker, Wells, they're a decent player. The secondary is a lot of young pieces. This Florida defense is a very young unit overall. A lot of these guys don't have a whole lot of experience, and they come back in here and try to challenge this very experienced Utah offense. It's quite the opposite with the Utah offense. Cam Rising, a veteran. Devon Ville, Money Parks are all experienced players as well. Brent Kuthi, a very experienced tight end, a nice natural-born leader, a very deep offensive line for this team as well. So I think this Florida defense is going to struggle with this matchup against this Utah offense that has a lot of veteran players that are pretty physical as well at certain times. They should be able to run the ball here and get some nice moves. And if they have to go to the air, they can definitely torch this secondary that's shown some weakness at times.
Yeah, I certainly think that the Gators have to stand tall against the run. The Utes, the biggest key for them is they just want to make Mertz play from behind, especially here on the road. He is a veteran. He's played in the Big Ten, but I certainly think in this kind of new role, he's still going to certainly be rattled. The Florida defensive line, led by Cam Jackson, the transfer, and Desmond Watson. I think they might be able to showcase some physicality, and I think they'll have some good plays against the run. But overall, I think Utah's going to win that battle at the end of the day. 38-17 for me. Nick, you have the exact same scoring margin in this one. Obviously, some people are thinking maybe the Gators can come in here and hang, and I think they will for a little bit, but I think they're just going to be outclassed here on the road to Salt Lake City.
I think they'll be outclassed on the road as well. I agree with that assessment. I think they can hang in the first quarter, potentially pushing the second quarter. They do have a talented offense on the ground. So if they are going to win this game, it's going to come from the ground. They're going to have to ground and pound and really grind down this Utah defense that has some weaknesses on the interior. But overall, I think Utah's going to win this game. Going to be a nice packed crowd, Salt Lake City, a big game for, what is left of the Pac-12 at this point, quite frankly. And I want to see what Florida can do here. This is a big game for Florida. If Florida can go up to Utah and win this game, that's a season-changing win in week 1, which is kind of crazy to say, but it would really set the tone for Billy Napier as he kind of struggles and heads into his second season here.
We got some other notable games on a Thursday night slate. Nothing really major here. Mitch Griffiths is going to take over for Wake Forest. Going to be a collision course for that offense. They're going to put up a lot of points. UCF joining the Big 12, hosting Kent State, who loses a lot. South Dakota and Missouri. And then Arizona State, Kenny Dillingham, 10 p.m. against Southern Utah. I know that the NC State-UConn game is one you were talking about just a minute ago, and it's the only real standout here compared to the other two games we have at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, I think this one's kind of interesting. NC State travels to Connecticut to play UConn. Kind of a weird game, obviously out of conference with UConn being an independent. I think NC State has a lot of question marks this year under Dave Dorian. Where do they kind of transition under some new quarterback play? They had high expectations last year and disappointed. We're still looking for that breakthrough at NC State. Very interesting matchup early on. I think that South Dakota Missouri game's interesting as well. I've pegged Missouri to be a sleeper team in the SEC. Can this offense come out and blitz a South Dakota team that's not very good early on and kind of set a statement point for this team? Very interesting matchups in the Thursday night slate.
Moving to the primer on Friday night, getting you ready for Saturday from Atlanta. Louisville takes on Georgia Tech, an ACC opener here in Week 1. There's a lot to look forward to in this Louisville football team. They added incredible speed to the receiving core. Jamari Thrash, Jaden Thompson, Jimmy Callaway, picked up Kevin Coleman as well to go along with Amari Huggins-Bruce. They're incredibly deep at receiver. Not a lot of people are talking about this. Jeff Brom arrives instantly. He puts everything together here. He gets a guy back in Brian Hudson at center, Jack Plummer, A-plus transfer, because obviously they worked together at Purdue for a amount of years. He's going to come in here and he's going to run this scheme to perfection. Jawar Jordan, I'm also very interested to see his role, because obviously they're not going to look to run the ball as much, but he was a real game breaker for them this past season. I think Georgia Tech here, I don't think they're really going to be able to compete. This offense is kind of a joke. Trey Cooley, Louisville transfer, comes over trying to make a statement against his former team. And I think him and Dante Smith will be a formidable duo this year. Zach Pyron, Haynes King, maybe even Zach Gibson, who's going to be the quarterback. We don't know. This receiving core also made some big-time additions, though. Dominic Blaylock, Chase Lane, Christian Leary. They're obviously trying to, make some work in the portal for themselves under Brent Key, who ends up retaining this position after, a pretty solid end to last season. And the defensive side of the ball, top to bottom for Georgia Tech's not all that great. I do think that nose tackle Daquan Dose is solid. And I think the secondary is really good. LaMiles Brooks, I think, will be a first-team all-conference player. KJ Walson, the nickel, was very sound. Clayton Powell-Lee, another safety there. So I think the secondary, this is going to be a fun matchup against the elite speedest receiving core, Nick. And obviously one thing we talked about with Louisville is, these first couple of games, I think they played 2 of their first 3 games in domes. And that's going to be big for trying to get this passing offense acclimated, not having to worry about the weather conditions and whatnot. I have a bit of a more minimal score, 35-23, but I think that could absolutely blow this team out of the water through the air. I'm going to give the secondary a little bit benefit of the doubt. They'll struggle, but they won't be completely awful on this Friday night. How do you feel about this game? One the Cardinals should win with ease.
I like this game. I think it's kind of an interesting scheduling here. 2 teams with first-year head coaches in terms of first year running the program fully. Louisville, obviously, I think they struck great gold here, landing Brom. I think he's a fantastic hire. Brent Key, not a bad hire for Georgia Tech either. In Atlanta, in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, a little bit farther off campus for Georgia Tech. I like this Louisville team a lot. There's so much to like about this team, in my opinion. They revamped this offense overnight. Jack Plummer is a very steady, sturdy quarterback. Was good for Cal last year, probably the best player on that Cal team. I like him in the pocket. Very good, natural-born leader. Jaden Thompson, Jamari Thrash, very good ads. Jimmy Callaway, another great ad at wide receiver. Amari Huggins-Bryce is a very good player to return in the slot. Chris Bell, the sophomore, could be involved, the X or the Z. Nice moving him around as well. Jamar Jordan, he was a pretty good running back for Louisville last year. This defense returned some nice pieces. They added some pieces as well. Storm Duck looking to rebound after he had some tough times in his different earliest part of his career. Desmond Tell, a nice player at nose tackle. Ashton Gelati as well, a nice edge rusher coming off the edge for Louisville. I like this team to blow out this Georgia Tech team. Georgia Tech's transitioning. They added a lot of different pieces. I like some of the ads, certainly. But just a whole transition era here. Haynes King probably is going to be the starter at quarterback. What's he going to be able to do early on? Dominic Blaylock, Christian Leary are 2 guys that have some nice experience. Leary in the slot's not a bad player. And the defense for Georgia Tech, I worry a little bit. Andre White was a good ad, but outside of that, they didn't really address any issues in the defense. There's a lot of question marks. I think Louisville is just going to blitz them through the air here and really show off this new air raid scheme with Jack Plummer behind the helm. He's going to want to get comfortable early on in this dome and sling the ball. I have a nice blowout here, but this game could be fun to watch on a Friday night if you don't have anything going on, to kind of get a good feel for this Louisville team as they head in a new direction under Jeff Brom.
The Cardinal had the top pass rush in the nation last year. Obviously, they have to replace some of those playmakers. I just want to ask you, Nick, how do you think this game will go if the secondary does, in fact, hold this receiving core? I think it's going to be hard with how much speed they have. 109th last year nationally against the run. So if they can force them to slow down a bit through the air, I wonder what that does for this rushing attack. And I think if they can do that, this game will be completely different. And knowing how college football works, that's probably exactly what might just end up happening, is that this receiving core gets slowed down in their first game. So what do you think would be the approach after that? And how do you think this game would go?
It certainly is going to be difficult for Louisville to find a way to keep up if this Georgia Tech secondary does keep them at bay. This is a good secondary unit. Like you said, I do think there are some nice pieces that they have here. LaMiles Brooks is a good junior. Clayton Powell-Lee was a good true freshman slot safety. So I like to see what he can do. Keontae Watson as well is a pretty good player at right cornerback. So I think there is a certain possibility this Georgia Tech secondary does hold this team. I think Jawar Jordan is a good running back. I like to see what he can do. I think they're going to try and unleash him in the second half if they are struggling. I think they're in good hands if he has to carry the rock. He has a nice speed, good burst. I think they'll still find a way to win and probably cover the spread at that point.
Final prediction for me, 35-23. Nick going with a 32-point victory as well. And I think we'll see a handful of big passing plays that really sparked that one, though. Looking at the rest of the week 1 Friday night slate, not much. Eastern Michigan, Howard, Michigan State hosting Central Michigan, Jim McElwain's crew. The two Miamis face off together. Kansas, we get to see Jalen Daniels that is hosting Missouri State. And then Stanford in Hawaii. I think this is a game that's going to be pretty interesting. 11 p.m. I probably won't stay up to watch this one, Nick, but I wouldn't be shocked one bit to wake up and see the Hawaii knocked off a horrible Stanford team.
Certainly might be worth checking out the Miami-Ohio game, the Battle of Miami's in Miami, Coral Gables. Might be worth checking out. Obviously, Miami didn't quite live up to Miami, Florida. That is, quite didn't live up to expectations last year. They disappointed under their first-year head coach, Mario Cristobal, who had a lot of expectations coming in, trying to revamp what has been more or less a dormant program there in South Beach. They're looking to hit the stride this year. You're very high on the Hurricanes. I'm a little bit more cautiously optimistic, but they kick off the season on a Friday night. You can maybe get some eyes on that. Also, the Michigan State team. We have a lot of question marks with Michigan State. They look to be in for a tough year. How do they look against Central Michigan early on?
That's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Week 1 is fastly approaching. Glad we were able to do this episode today. Fun one here. These weekday games are always a great way to get the season started.
Very excited. Some of these teams, they don't get a lot of attention when they play on Saturdays. It's tough to watch. There's so many great matchups. These teams get to play on a weeknight. You get some more extra attention from guys like me and you. It's fun to check out some of these talented teams that get to play on a weeknight, play national television.
Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
Well done.